Yeah, thank you all four of you for being here. Joy, thank you for moderating. I will pass this off to you so everyone can introduce themselves, but I am super excited for this session. I know a lot of people are always like, how do I even get my Web3 project off the ground? Do I have to fundraise? Do I bootstrap? They don't even think grants are an option. So excited to dive into this with you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm Joy, the moderator of this panel. We're going to be talking all about grants as a source of funding, and we're going to jam for about 30 minutes and then open up the floor to any questions. I am the co-founder of Investera, an investment education community covering Web 2 and Web 3. I'm really passionate about women stepping fully empowered into the role of an investor, and my background is in financial inclusion in emerging markets, providing capital to entrepreneurs. I did that for a decade and faced a lot of challenges in traditional finance. And for me, my entry point into blockchain and crypto was a means to address those challenges, at least explore addressing those challenges. So I am joined today by amazing leaders in the space as panelists, and I'm going to ask that each of them do a brief introduction and also share how they got into the Web3 space before we kick this panel off. Megan, do you want to start?
Absolutely. So I actually got my start in the Web3 space through data science and biotech. So I ran a biotech startup company that did high throughput microscopy. And I thought doing these things that would be like very innovative in the world of, science, that like the difficult issues that we would have would be around, like building high precision robotics or, computer vision. And I really quickly came to learn that the real problems that we had were all around data storage and data sharing. And a lot of these things that I just thought were solved problems in the world were not. And that's what got me to Filecoin, which is a peer-to-peer file sharing network. It's a layer 1 protocol that really lets us recreate the internet and rethink the way that we understand the way that we validate data, share data, and reward people for storing data. And I have been really amazed with the Web3 world and finding that it really creates new opportunities to solve a lot of the issues that really should have been solved problems in the Web 2 world.
Amazing. Thanks, Megan. Janine?
Hi, everyone. Good to see all of you. I know we're not in person, but I think we're going to try and recreate some fun energy in this room. So stoked to be here with all of you guys. My name is Janine Lejeune. I work at Gitcoin. I run the grants program there, which we'll dive into all of that in a little bit. How I got involved in Web3. So I used to work in consulting at Deloitte. So I was at a big corporate. And while I was there, I transitioned into a group called Hybrid Solutions and Incubation, where I started a group called On Demand Talent. And what I was looking at was how we as Deloitte and all of our clients in the enterprise world could use freelancers to get work done versus hiring people full time. And while I was doing that, I sort of realized like the incentive structures that we had and all of the legislation and work that we had in place of how we get work done in Web 2 didn't make that much sense. Like on average, it takes 100 days to hire an individual. And I started looking at like where were some structures that were working really well when it came to hiring and getting work done. And Web3 totally captivated me. And that's when I found Gitcoin and Gitcoin grants, where I think we're doing a phenomenal job of kind of flipping the switch of how we hire. And instead of hiring people based on work that we think needs to get done, we're allowing the community and empowering the community to decide on what work needs to be done in the space and giving them grants to achieve those goals. So that's kind of how I got involved. And I'm super fascinated about how Web3 is pushing forward the future of work.
Thank you, Anna.
Amazing. So excited to join you all. It was so great. We just met yesterday for the first time and all jammed that we all have this vision and this passion around future of work in common. And this is really how I found my way into Web3 as well. I like to tell the story that I feel like I never really had a like traditional quote unquote job. And even when I was in school, I remember going to career workshops and saying, like, when everyone had to put what they wanted to be when they grow up on a post-it, I remember writing that the job that I will have does not exist yet. Except at the time, in my head, I was thinking that this was going to be powered by Web2 technologies, because like jobs like social media manager and like different like Web2 jobs were just beginning to emerge. But what I didn't realize is how many more opportunities this Web3 world will create for future of work. And after graduating, I made up my own major because I was interested in a lot of different things. And I worked in digital consulting. So I did digital media work, and I got to travel a lot as a result. And I found out that there's a really huge overlap between people who traveled and people who were interested in crypto. Back then we used to call it crypto. And I started attending meetups and just got completely fell down the rabbit hole that way. And I found Maker community, the Maker DAO community, and started to contribute. And this is why I'm so passionate about grants, because I got my start kind of through a grant ecosystem, and I started getting grants to do different kind of community work. We were building like a community portal at the time. We were doing a lot of different work to get more people involved. And then because I was doing a lot of that work, I actually got hired to work for the Maker Foundation. And I was there when we decentralized foundation and moved fully to the DAO. And after that, I later moved on to Scylla Foundation, where I now run community programs as well, and accomplish a lot of the work through grants. So I was both on the receiving end and on the giving end of grants. And I think this is such a powerful way to get your start in the ecosystem.
I love that. We have such a wealth of experience on this panel and some overlap on our journeys for sure. So I think, why is this panel important? Well, anyone who has a project in the Web3 space or is exploring starting one, fundraising can be such an intimidating and overwhelming process. If you're bootstrapping and you're looking for support and weighing whether, to explore taking grants as a source of funding, grants can be an excellent alternative to just traditional seed capital and buy you more time if you do plan to go venture in the future too. I do think though, there are a lot of misconceptions about grants, and I'll share my own little anecdote to set the stage. I remember in 2020 when my co-founder came to me when we first started Investera, and she's like, let's explore some grants. I think she sent me a few links, maybe Gitcoin was even one of them. And I'm normally a pretty agreeable person and open to things. And I was like, hard pass, not touching that. And that was because I was so scarred by my experiences in Web 2. At one point, I worked for a nonprofit before it became a for-profit, and worked on some pretty big name grants and pretty significant amounts, but there were points where I wondered if it was even worth it. I remember I have nightmares of like binders of due diligence and burdensome reporting requirements that sometimes felt nonsensical, and just the application process alone, and sometimes never hearing back from after putting so much effort in. And so I know, Megan, you shared yesterday too, that you had some scars from experiences like that too. Well, fast forward to this year, 2022, and I'm part of an initiative called the Values Index. Eve Wealth is involved in that too. And we have gone through raising some funds through Gitcoin. And we also did an attempt at a Cello Grant Foundation. And my mind was just blown away by the different experience I had in Web3. The whole application process was so frictionless compared to Web 2. And so I think it's so important to start off setting the stage with that. And I think we can jump right into then maybe talking about further demystifying grants and what some of the misunderstandings and misconceptions are about grant opportunities in Web 3.
Totally. I mean, I definitely, like you said, Joy, like I had the same experiences in my Web 2 world, especially being in science, trying to apply for these like owners grants. And I think even the term grant is really different in the Web 3 world. Like I think that like in the Web 2 world, and like the world of science, the world of academia, you think of grants as being things that are like primarily for nonprofits, and like really in like the Web 3 world, it's a lot more about like rethinking the ways that that work is structured,
Yeah, Megan, I couldn't agree more. I also think that like in general, you know, a lot of people think because of like the Web 2 structure of grants, like grants are for something very specific. And in Web 2, it's sort of like nonprofit work and academia. And people immediately think like, okay, in Web 3, it must be for something technical, where it's like, unless I'm doing something technical, I couldn't possibly apply for a grant. But in Web 3, it's sort of how we're getting so much of the work done. And like, it's such a blank canvas right now that we need people with brilliant minds and exciting ideas to come into the space and participate across the board. Like we've stepped past the mark of just supporting technical work, and are funding things both from people in Web 2 and from people who are not even in Web 2 and just like focus on real life initiatives. We're seeing a lot of that at Gitcoin.
I think that's really important because I also had the impression that grants in Web3 really were for developers only. And I know that's changing and the narrative shifting around that, but I still think it's important to emphasize you don't have to be a developer.
Totally. And I think that, you know, we think of grants in the Web3 world as a great way to like get your feet wet and test out if, you know, if working in Web3 is a good space for you, even before you've maybe fully made that transition. I think like some other things that like just to demystify around grants is, you know, all of us on this panel, like we were talking yesterday, and I would say like everybody in the Web3 world is excited to have you reach out to us. So if you're not sure if a grant is a good fit for you, like we are all here to, you know, to talk to you about it and see what kinds of projects like make for a good project and what kinds of projects don't. Another piece of advice that I'd give for people who are like just like dipping their toe in the Web3 world and applying for their first grants is to try to think of, if you don't have any track record about working in Web3, try to think of like a small project that you can do, like what's a like MVP that you can, you know, that you can do with that grant to start like proving your track record. Like do something small that you're legitimately interested in doing, rather than trying to fit something that you think that like the grant that the grant giving agency is going to want, you know, that like the foundation is going to want.
Yeah, and I also just wanted to point out, I think there's two types of grants. There can be like one-off grants to complete a project, and that can be more milestone based, that usually like once it's completed, then it's paid out. Then there's also grants that I've given, for example, that are ongoing grants. So like signing someone to be an ambassador for several months to go and build a local hub in a specific region, or like meetup grants that are ongoing to create a series of meetups or a series of communities. Like those are very different kinds of grants, and you can get started by just thinking about like what excites you and what are you passionate about, and what kind of work would you be interested in doing, and then see like who has those kinds of grant programs. And then the other piece that I was thinking a lot about is also looking, I think that one of the misconceptions is like there's just like one big black box, and we can definitely do a much better job about like letting people know like where to apply, what the differences are. But specifically at for example, at the Celo Foundation where I work, like the Celo Foundation is not the only entity that is supporting the entire Celo ecosystem, which Celo is also a layer 1 blockchain. It's EVM compatible. And the reason the foundation exists really, so like there's C Labs, which is like the technical engineering and protocol engineering team that started the Celo protocol. But then there's also the foundation, which bootstraps all of the ecosystem and community and growth around Celo. And we were entrusted with the treasury, which we spend on different grants buckets and other strategic growth activities. But then the protocol itself has an on-chain fund. So some of the rewards from the protocol go to that bucket, and then people can apply to that and start their own funds. So like now, a year ago when I joined Celo, there was only grants, the foundation grants, and like one other entity that was just spinning up. And now we have 3 different grants entities that are all independent, that have their own application process, that are funding different parts of the ecosystem. So they have their own like kind of like investment thesis. Like foundation has one investment thesis in terms of like what we are looking to fund, but then there's also a community fund. And then there's like, there's a climate collective fund that's funding specifically climate projects. So it's like the rabbit hole goes really deep. So I think it's worthwhile trying to explore and see where your project could fit in.
And I think on that note, Anna, like kind of talking about like there's so many different areas to get grants. There's also just like it's a more of an infinite pie than what we've experienced in sort of the Web2 space. Like there's a sense of, there's a finite amount of funds that are going around to a finite amount of grants, and like God forbid you apply for multiple different grants from different places because the one might nix you for trying to apply somewhere else. And it's definitely much more of a like collaborative community-based effort where if you're doing an interesting project and like you're game to give it a real shot, a lot of people in the space want to support you. So Celo might give you a grant, Gitcoin might give you a grant, even multiple different ecosystems within the Gitcoin rounds might give you grants. So just kind of like putting it out there that it isn't a finite pie, but an infinite pie. And the more of you that can participate, the better for us.
I think that's such an excellent point. Like, don't shy away from applying to more than one. And if there's one takeaway from this, I want people to know there are so many grant opportunities available to founders and to get your projects off the ground and running, to fund your community treasury, help pay out your contributors. And it's so important we do that in the space. I think a lot of women are willing to go pro bono for far too long, in my opinion. And so, yes, there's so many opportunities and there is no playbook. That's one thing about for Web3 grants. The space is changing so quickly. There's so many interesting approaches. You will hear about different funding models, from retroactive funding to quadratic. There's really no standardized approach, which can also be a little overwhelming, but again, don't be afraid to reach out and ask for clarification when needed. So on that note, Gitcoin is very well known for its quadratic funding. Janine, can you tell us more about what the heck quadratic funding is so people can understand that approach?
Sure can. So everyone, when they say, what work do you do? I say, I run a grants program that uses quadratic funding, and I get this kind of look at, so I'm going to give it a go. But essentially, why we use quadratic funding. So this was an idea put out by Vitalik, and we sort of decided like, hey, let's give this algorithm and this mechanism a go and see if we can use it for grants. And how it's structured is, say you've got two separate grants. You've now got two ways that grant is going to be funded. You've got a matching pool. So like bigger donors that want to put in, say, 100K towards a specific type of round. So in this case, like we've got a round that's running in DEI, and we've got, a big pool of funds that larger donors are putting money into. Then you've got your individual donors that are coming and saying like, I want to donate $10 to this. I want to donate $30 to this project. So kind of like a Kickstarter campaign in that sense. And how we use quadratic funding is that the grants that get more people donating to their project, even if it's with smaller amounts, than say one grant that gets one person donating, will get a significantly higher match than the one that's only got one person donating. And why do we do that? The reason we do it is so that we're trying to engage the entire community and saying whatever projects the community wants to support at large, regardless of how much money they can put in, are the projects that we want to support. So it's pretty exciting to see that work where it's not just a one-to-one match based on dollars, but it's a many-to-one match based on number of people contributing.
That's excellent description, and I think very democratic and favoring the community over, a whale, like whoever writes the biggest check, right? And really
Exactly.
about funding public goods in an equitable way. So I would love to hear also about like any memorable experiences any of you have had, either, giving or receiving a grant. Anna, you had mentioned before you had a personal experience as at Maker Grant, right? And starting on that end of things.
Yeah, definitely. I think if it wasn't for the Maker community grants program, I don't know how or when I would have found my way into Web3. So I think that's definitely been super memorable. And it was like at the time there was this idea for us to for a community development team, the point was how do we nurture, how do we identify, nurture, and support the most active community members? And the way that we did that was essentially through identifying valuable work and then giving people grants to see what they're able to do with it. And that's, yeah, like I said, that's how I got my start in the ecosystem. And that's why, like, as working on the foundation, it's like one of the most rewarding things is to be able to just give away money to people who are really passionate and who are looking to get started. And some of my favorite grants to give out, and like we give, again, like we have different buckets of grants, and I specifically, I'm a portfolio manager for a community bucket of grants. And we also have like technical grants, and we do have infrastructure grants, and we also have public goods grants. But for community grants, like some of my most memorable ones are when we do sponsorships for conferences. So sometimes we'll sponsor like a DAO to be able to go to a hackathon or to send some members. We've also hosted talent houses where we've also like given scholarships for people to come and stay at conferences together. And I think there is nothing more meaningful than being able to bring people together in real life, especially people who are attending like their first conference or are participating in their first hackathon. Those are always the most special grants for me to give. Yeah, because I think the impact that they can have is like, we have no idea the scale of impact that can have in the ecosystem when you give someone a grant to be able to participate.
There is such a ripple effect. And I know I personally met numerous women at ETH Denver who introduced themselves. And when they said, you know, how they ended up there, that it was through sponsorship, through, I think it was Cello behind it, but with like her DAO and some others. That's amazing. And Janine, you had mentioned that you've seen people take like the journey of going from grantees to grantors as well, kind of like Anna's experience. Do you have any memorable ones to share?
Yeah, actually in this round, so we've just launched a grants round, and how Gitcoin runs is that we run rounds every quarter, and it's like you can apply at any time of the year, but during that quarter you can go and donate to different grants, and then we do the quadratic funding matches at the end of the round. And what's really cool to see this round is I think we actually have 3 of our donors who are, you know, giving to those larger pools that I mentioned. 3 of them are individual or projects that were actually grantees previously. So it's super cool to see that like grantees that were being, you know, they started as a really small project on our platform, have grown and are now at a stage where they're like giving back and trying to contribute to growing the ecosystem even further. It just like signifies to me that this is this growing pie versus like a finite amount of funds that like everyone fend for themselves. It's like a help me thrive and I will go and help someone else thrive in the future.
I definitely felt that being a part of the GR14 round with Gitcoin, and especially given the market, it being crypto winter, I was just amazed by the warmth that was felt in this crypto winter in the community, and even getting invites to Twitter spaces to discuss our project and to support other projects that were in the round. Like it wasn't competition, it was collaboration. And that was not in my experience in Web2. I can tell you that for sure. So I'm sure many on here are curious about, since you guys are on the grantor side now, what really sets apart a successful grant application, or what are things that someone that's applying should keep in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely gonna double down on some of the things I said before about like, you know, reaching out to the organization that is giving out the grant, and, you know, kind of piggybacking off of what Anna said earlier, there are oftentimes many grant streams happening within the same ecosystem. So, you know, at the Filecoin Foundation, we have developer grants, which are generally more technical and are more like work bounties. We have, you know, our nonprofit arm, which gives grants to more humanitarian causes. Like we're doing a lot of work to onload data from large organizations like Harvard or Muckrock, you know, bringing on independent journalists' data and keeping it safe. And I think that one of the things that we do not always do well as a Web3 community is like we're not I think a side effect of decentralization is that things are not always as well coordinated as you would like. And so sometimes it can be a little confusing about all the different grant streams that exist. So I think that reaching out and finding out, like, if that's not the right grant stream for you, don't give up on that ecosystem. Like, keep asking and keep like pulling on other threads within that ecosystem, because there usually are like several grant streams. It's not always super clear.
Yeah, and while I think, the application like I mentioned earlier can be super frictionless and quick compared to Web 2, for sure the UX overall can be, improved. I think we've all experienced that in Web 3. What are some other, some advice that you can give to people applying for grants in terms of their application?
Yeah, I can also speak to that. I think having clarity around what what it is that you would like to build is really important, even if you haven't really, even if you're just starting out, just kind of like being able to hash out the idea and explain clearly like what your intention is and what, like, which kind of like bucket or like which theme you would like to contribute to. That would definitely set it apart. And then also actually, speaking of GR15, like we often use Gitcoin rounds for projects that like maybe have gotten a really small pool or like just had their first grant there, but we use that as signal to give out larger grants. So for example, if someone had a grant and it was like it attracted some matching or some donations, then like this to us is like signal in the noise, the same way that you're like voting with your money for Gitcoin to get matching. It's also interesting for us to see as an ecosystem, like, oh, like a lot of people are paying attention to something, like we would like to also give them a larger grant, or like this is something that we would like to develop. So being able to be involved in multiple grant streams for different companies actually will give us an indication that like this project is really committed. Yeah, I think that's some of the thoughts I have.
And sort of adding on to that, just like one thing that we look at Gitcoin, because it seems like we're sort of at the like front of when something's just starting, which can sometimes be a bit more challenging. But any type of existing work that you can share, like of any kind, and sharing your Twitter, sharing a GitHub, or if you don't have a GitHub, sharing any type of website that you can reference, or even an article that you've written about the topic, just shows some signal that you've invested in and gotten excited about the idea that you're putting out there. That's further along than just writing one paragraph in a grant application.
Yeah, so important. And I also think we're all advocates of getting more women into this space. Janine, you'd mentioned that in 2018 at Youth Denver, you were the only female volunteer. I'm so glad we've come a long way from there, but I think there's still so much room to have more women in the space. I'd love to hear your comments on that.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely one of those things where the bathroom line was really short every time I needed to go.
Standard for crypto conferences, yeah.
The only time where the bathroom line is shorter than anywhere else, other than if you're at a bike race. But essentially, in 2018, it was how I got into the space, and I was like, well, let me just volunteer at one of these conferences. So volunteered at Youth Denver and was one of the only female volunteers there. But actually, after that, I sort of saw it as like a potential opportunity. I was like, I'm sure because we're underrepresented, there's a lot of support that I can seek out in the space if I look for it. And lo and behold, there was just like a ton of groups that were women focused and like getting women into Web3. So that's all out there. And it just like takes a little bit of searching. So whether that's searching on Twitter, whether it's searching online, whether it's reaching out to other women in Web3, like all of us here probably have a story about like a women's group or support that we got from other women in the space. And like, I would be flattered for someone to reach out to me and ask about like who they should connect with and like different groups. So to me, it's awesome to see that there are these hubs, and we've just got to all work on rallying around them as a community.
Yeah, and actually it's so funny because 2 years later at Youth Denver 2020, right before the pandemic, actually Meta Gamma Delta was summoned as the first like grant giving DAO that specifically supported like women-led projects. So this was one of the groups that I got involved with first whenever I got into the space as well. And since then, we've raised money through Gitcoin and then through other rounds and just given out money to projects. One of them being Good Ghosting, which is run by Rachel. She's an amazing founder. And then also like a bunch of other memorable grants. And now so many other programs have their own grant departments, like Boys Club, which is another organization that supports women in Web3. They just opened up a grants program. Various DAOs like Blue DAO and Her DAO all have scholarship and grant programs. So yeah, I definitely think the space has evolved so much, and it's really great to see that.
It really is. And I also think your point of like volunteering for somewhere like ETH Denver is an excellent entry point, and they are always short of volunteers. Yeah. I witnessed that firsthand this year for sure. And people can be shy. Don't be shy. Sign up to be a volunteer at ETH Denver. It's a great entry point. So I want to give a little time for each of you to plug your project and a preview of what someone can expect if they wish to apply, like a very high level, right? Because they're going to go to your websites and check out the details. But like, is it an application process that takes, 10 minutes or 3 hours? When's your next grant cycle open? If it's on, a quarterly basis, or if it's on a rolling basis, and also highlighting any RFPs that you may have out there. That's another thing is, I think there's a lot of grantors that also have ideas in mind for what they want built on their protocol, for example, and are looking for people to sign up, and they have the funding for those projects that they have in mind.
I can start off talking a little bit about what's happening in the Filecoin universe right now. So just in the world of the Filecoin Foundation, not including a lot of grant opportunities that happen at Protocol Labs, which is another large company in the Filecoin universe, the people who created the open source software that runs the Filecoin protocol. So just within Filecoin Foundation, we've got a bunch of different streams. We have our nonprofit stream, which has a big focus on building a large digital library. So anybody who has interest in saving some of the humanity's most important information, uploading projects, collaborations with universities or academics, also education. So bringing people, we have specifically people who are underrepresented in the Web3 world, DEI initiatives, so educational initiatives in Web3. We also have our developer grants. So that's building projects and tooling that would be useful in the Filecoin universe. So whether those are tools that are going to be used by anybody within the world of Filecoin, or whether that's somebody who wants to start a business within Filecoin, we have grant funding there. We also have a Filecoin Green initiative, which is doing some of, I know I'm biased, but what I think is some of the most innovative work in getting the blockchain world to understand its energy consumption and make sure that we are, creating the right incentive systems to make sure that as we are building out blockchain technology, that we are doing it in a way that is not going to harm our environment and that is using energy that is renewable and coming from the right sources. So those are some big areas that we have going on, and all of those have a pretty open schedule. So a couple of those do have rounds that they happen in, but the rounds are pretty frequent. So I would say reach out to on any of those streams.
Amazing. And Janine, you all just launched yesterday,
Yeah.
right? The R15 round, but people can still apply.
Chaos. No, it's not that chaotic, but we're having a great time so far. There's been some awesome grants that have come in. It's just so exciting to see how many people are excited about building really cool and impactful things. So we just launched our round. It runs until September 22nd. If you are a grantee, you want to apply this week by as essentially as soon as possible, because the sooner you apply, the sooner we can put you into the round and actually start getting you funding. So a lot of the grants have actually applied before the round began, which was on Wednesday, so that they could spend the whole week sort of shilling their grants and trying to get people to donate. But there's still time. So apply before Monday. It takes, it can take anywhere between 30 minutes and 2 hours, depending on how much time you put into your grant application, but it shouldn't take that long. I'm just going to put in, you just can go to gitcoin.co/grants. And you can just create a grant over there. The onboarding document for grantees is right there underneath, like create your grant, as well as the eligibility criteria for our different rounds. So that is something that's really exciting. I'm super excited about the DEI round. So diversity, equity, inclusion round. We're really trying to focus on how can we fund people that are building things both to get more women into the space. So say you wanted to put a women's like meetup together, or say you wanted to help like with female education around crypto, or just like Web3 in general, that would be something that's like valuable. Or if you're just doing a project that, you're a female founder that's trying to get funding, you'd probably be accepted into that round. So both go and apply. And if you aren't ready to apply, go and explore, like go and see what grants are being put out there, so you can get a better sense of, what is going on. And sort of, as Anna said, our grants program is like a great signal to see what people want to support in the space. And you can see the mix, like the matched amounts that projects are likely going to get. So the ones with higher matched amounts are ones that are getting a lot more support from the broader community, which gives you a good sense of like, where are there like really cool things that are going on that people are in desperate need of, that can help fuel your ideas to apply for a grant in the future.
Amazing. All right, Anna, and then we're going to go to questions after this.
Yeah, really quickly, I just dropped a bunch of links in the chat, but for Celo Foundation grants, you can go to celoecosystem.com/grants. And there you can see all of the different streams that exist. And then there's also 3 different entities that they're all linked in the ecosystem page, but there is Presenti, Ocelot Labs, and Climate Collective, and they each have their own focus that they support. And then Metagam Delta, I also linked in the chat. This is a DAO that also focuses on grants. So definitely don't be shy, explore. And the last piece of advice I have also is like, go on the forum. Like most of the, everyone here, like there's the Gitcoin forum, there's a Celo forum, or join the Discord. But forum is usually where a lot of people will post like longer form proposals. And it's a great way to see what people are talking about, what people are proposing, and just also get more insights into what you might be able to get a grant for.
Amazing. Well, thank you all so much for your time. It was amazing to have representatives from Gitcoin, Celo, Filecoin. Audience had asked it for some other names. Others you can look up are Optimism, Algorand, Polygon, Near Foundation, Aave. These all offer grants amongst others. And yes, often to support building on their ecosystem. So I hope you had something really valuable to take away from this, and knowing that, grants are one tool of many in funding, but they can play a really pivotal role in, I think, equaling the playing field at early stage for your projects, especially. So I'm going to open now the floor for any questions that we may have. And I'm also going to drop everyone's links here, our Twitter handles. Megan, I think I missed yours. So
yes, I'm sorry. I was remiss on that. That's totally on me. Yeah,
so follow us on Twitter. Also a plug, Investera has a weekly newsletter for all things going on, like the markets, to stay on top of. So check that out too on our website. And follow these ladies. It's incredible to have them as a resource. So really feel fortunate to have had you all on this panel. All right, so one question received was, how do you think about positioning non-technical versus like developer-oriented grants? I think in terms of if someone's writing one and it's non-technical, what's the best way of positioning that?
I can take that just because we have a lot of rounds that are like fully non-technical rounds, and then rounds that are, so it's like we'll do specific, we didn't get into the details. You can go through our onboarding doc and it'll walk through our ecosystem rounds, our cause rounds, and just the main round in general. If it is like a non-technical thing, just position it at that. Like, you don't need to try and force fit technical jargon into that. You sort of just need to explain, like, how is it beneficial to the space? Even if it's not technical, there's a ton of stuff that's not technical that is valuable. If it is technical, adding your like GitHub repository is really helpful, just to get a sense of like what's going on in the project, and using that as sort of the way for us to get a sense of how it's going and like what are the big things you're pushing forward.
Great.
Yeah, totally. And also from the standpoint of just ecosystem, if you're applying for like a specific ecosystem grant, like the Celo ecosystem, we will often look at like, how does this help? How is this like helping grow or deepen relationships within our community, or what is it doing for the Celo ecosystem? So just being able to tie it in for why you feel strongly about a particular ecosystem or community, I think can go a really long way.
Absolutely. And so what are some of the typical ranges for grants that people can keep in mind? I know they're all over the place.
I think that if you are, if you're just getting into this space, like, it's good to have something that is like smaller and confined. And I would say usually in the sub $10,000 category. That's for us, if it's your first project and you have no track record, we'd probably look at something in the like $5,000 range. Of course, it's really dependent on the amount of work, but once you've kind of developed a track record and you have larger and larger pieces of work, like we give grants, in the $100,000 range. Like, I don't want to say all the time, but like for large pieces of work that have a clear roadmap, that's like not out of range.
Yeah,
And
I think it's pretty
Celo was up
comparable.
to 100, right? 100K.
Yeah, I think it's pretty comparable. Usually like small grants would be like 5 to 10K, medium could be anywhere between like under 50K, and then large would be up to 100. There's instances where there's larger development grants, but they would usually be like a strategic grant or some kind of strategic initiative. But yeah, I think it's just like within small, medium, or large grant is how it's usually tiered.
Yeah, and those are often called micro grants, right? And those can get green lighted really fast, I've heard.
Yes, definitely.
And then if you're applying to Gitcoin, it's kind of like up to you with how we do credit funding. It's about like you promoting your grant, and similar to, Kickstarter in the Web2 space, like the more you promote it, the more you get individual donors to contribute, and that gives you a larger matching donation from the main pool. So you could get anything from $100 to $100,000, depending on how people react to it.
Awesome. Any other questions? We have to wrap for the next panel shortly. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. Looking forward to checking out some of the other sessions today.